What is customer success to you? What does that mean to you?
Customer success at its heart is a focus on customer value. It is, I think, too often relegated to a silo in a company when really it's at the heart, and or should be at least at the heart of everything that drives a company forward. So it's focused, it's aligning multiple functions, it's aligning everything from the product to how the company operates around single-handedly and single focus driving customer value. Customer success as a function exists because it helps to have a place where that lives, right? It helps to have someone whose entire focus is that and a team whose entire focus is that. But at the end of the day, to me, customer success is customer value.
Now you mentioned already one of these doomed words or the things that we really want to get rid of is the word silo in
Mm,
terms of basically nothing in the modern world, basically nothing is basically allowed to stay a silo because everything is connected, especially in CS. And this is also why I love the customer success job, because
hmm.
I can't be a silo. I have to talk to everyone and I have to stay connected. And this is why I love the job.
Yeah.
But why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to connect? And why is it so basically too easy to leave customer success to be a silo?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit the kind of the history of how revenue has been, right? So if you think about it, subscription revenue is a fairly new thing. New, I mean, maybe past 15 years. Um, Prior to having subscription revenue, you kind of sold a license fee or you sold something once, and that was it. That was how you made your money. And so sales was really the darling of revenue, right? The focus was on marketing, on sales, maybe on sales coming back in and making a new sale at some point. But I think there didn't need to be as much focus on customer success. So sales was the heart of driving revenue. Then subscription revenue started, and suddenly we realized, like, hey, we have to actually make sure that these customers that we sold to are renewing and are coming back next year. And so what used to be a support team and maybe an account management team was kind of cobbled together into this thing called customer success. I think it still didn't get that much focus. And I think it was a developing field for a while. Um, a lot of its development kind of came at a beautiful time in SaaS, right? When it was there was a bit more stability, there was a bit less churn. Times were good. Once customers bought, they weren't necessarily always putting what they'd purchased in their subscriptions under the microscope that they are today. There was competition, but it was kind of known and stable, and you'd have one or two competitors. And I think what's happening, and so in that time, it was easy for a company to say, hey, our revenue is always coming from sales. We kind of need to keep these customers around. Customer success, just kind of like you go and you deal with it. And we're going to keep focusing on new deals and on new logos. And now that was very stressful for customer success. That was not an easy job. We learned over time that we still needed resources and we still needed to align. And I think we see that some of the companies that have done really well have figured out how not to create this silo around customer success, and how to incorporate the customers and the learnings from customers and the case studies and their voice in continuing to drive the company forward. Now that's more critical than ever. And I think now that's some of why customer success is needing to come out of this silo, right? So also in some of this time of the company saying, hey, customer success, you go over there on this island with the existing customers. Customer success said, fine, but then if you're not going to give us the resources, we can't own renewals and like we can't own revenue. We're just going to focus on the customer then. And we're seeing now that that model doesn't work, right? As sales cycles are taking, well, spend is being analyzed much more closely right now. And so that means that renewals are not as easy as they were before. It means that sales cycles are taking a lot longer. So if a customer does churn, it's not as easy to just replace them with a new customer. Upsells aren't guaranteed, right? You can't just go and tell the customer, hey, guess what? You're going to pay us 5% more this year, 10% more this year. So it's putting a lot more pressure on the whole company, both to take care of these customers who are probably 2/3 of the revenue, even in healthy growth times. I think customer revenue, existing customer revenue, renewals and upsells are about 2/3 of revenue. So the focus now is much more on holding on to and growing that revenue. It's more efficient revenue. It's driving the business forward in a much better way. And in volatile times, in times of things changing really quickly, we need that feedback from customers to know what's coming, to understand what trends are impacting us, to understand new entrants to the market right now with vibe coding, and it's so quick to build up competition, and the competition can come in so many different shapes that we need to be hearing that feedback much more quickly and much more fully.
Since I've only heard about vibe coding yesterday or the day before yesterday, can you quickly explain what vibe coding is?
Yeah, I mean, the way I used it just now, I think it's non-engineers can now create products. I mean, that's the simplest way to say it. Or engineers can create code using AI much more quickly, right? So I think it can, I'm sure there are different shapes it can take, and it can look quite different depending on what programs you use and how you do it. But at the end of the day, the impact and what matters is that products that used to take a team of engineers months to create can now be created, not perfectly, but pretty well by either a much smaller team of engineers or by somebody who doesn't know how to code at all.
Yeah, I've played around with Replit. Have you tried this?
I don't know that one.
It's insane how quickly this went. So yeah, basically vibe coding, as I understand it, is basically what you said. I enjoyed reading the definition where basically it said it's more like saying you get a result and then you say, nah, something is off. So the vibe is off. So this is why it's called vibe coding. It's basically, yeah, I don't like this. Can you change the color scheme and stuff like this? Because this is basically just natural language, and whether, yeah, so basically it's just natural language. But usually you would need weeks of discussion with your engineering team to just change the colors. Now, you've mentioned that, of course, this would open the market to lots of new competitors and smaller companies to grow and start. Now, you've already mentioned value, and I think this is maybe the time to get into that topic. Of course, all of these smaller companies also have to understand the market to some degree, because they do have to create value for the customers. And of course, you mentioned already the sales cycles are getting longer, the renewals are getting more and more interesting, because of course it's needed.
Yeah.
And then at the heart of this is the value proposition, or to understand what the customer understands as valuable and how to measure it and to understand it. Now, if I would talk to someone who isn't in CS, and I basically tell them, yeah, it's really important to understand the customer, and then they always look at me really funny, because they say, yeah, but you've built a product. How don't you know what the customers need? You already have it, right?
Yeah.
Why is that so difficult? Why is it so incredibly difficult to understand what value is and how to measure it?
Mm. I I think it depends on the company and where they've come from. I am finding a lot of founders are really good technically, right? Especially technical founders, um, fall in love with a product and a set of features, right? And um, and I have been there. I've been in companies where this has happened. I've been part of this, where you're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool what we can build. Of course, everyone needs this. But I think often we skip the step or we maybe move a little too quickly through the step of actual market validation, and actually talking to end users. Or even if we've done that at the start, things change, right? As we, it is, I can't think of any company that the target customer that they launched with is still, and the target use case is still exactly the one that's driving them at 10 million ARR and at 50 million ARR. So first, there's kind of this natural evolution of stakeholders and of customers and of product market fit. And so there's this constant need to be reevaluating. I think that's even more true now as market shifts are happening so quickly. What people need, what pressures they're facing, what opportunities are available change really, really quickly. And so with that change, we're needing to constantly listen to customers, reevaluate the value we're driving, understand if the value we're driving is big enough, and is still the main pain point. Um, and yeah, so I think there's three main reasons I think companies don't do that. One is they never did it from the start, or they glossed over it. Um, the second is that they kind of don't have these feedback loops and aren't continuing to do it. And the third is that it's just hard. It can be really hard to get this information from customers, not necessarily like big picture values. Hopefully, you can get some of that, but then getting into the like, how do we measure it? What is the outcome? How do we know if we're driving that value? What can we tell? It's hard and it takes work. And I think there's a lot there, that can really help.
Who actually owns this? Is
Mm.
this the, like, let's say, this chief strategy officer? Is it customer success? Is it product? Who is in contact with the customer
Yeah,
about understanding how the market changes?
I think it's the whole company. It has to be the whole company. And it's at different levels, right? Everyone, it's like you're putting together this puzzle where everyone will have a slightly different piece of that puzzle or a slightly different lens or view in. Um, and so it has to be the focus. It has to be leadership's focus, right? So the CEO, the leadership team has to be kind of beating the drum of value. It used to be that I would say, yeah, the CEO should be joining customer calls, should be on there meeting with customers. I still think that's important. I think one of the benefits now of AI, though, is that as we're recording customer conversations and able to synthesize takeaways, um, we are increasing the availability of information and of synthesized information, right? So you might have 5 CSMs out there talking to different customers and all seeing a little piece. I think it's easier now to summarize that back up and to have the takeaways, be shared across the team. But I absolutely think it's that the whole company is needing to focus on it through the lenses that each person has.
And that ideally, of course, is collected by a central position, and that, of course, could be chief strategy, chief customer, someone that
It could
actually
be, or
you're.
even the CEO. I think it depends on how big the company is. at a startup, it's the CEO. Like the CEO has to be keeping, or the CEO, the founder, the founding team is kind of keeping this focus up. I think at a larger company, um, I mean, it still has to be leadership. It still has to be central leadership that as part of their planning are continuing to evaluate where do we sit in the market, where is the market going, and how do we fit into that. Um, and yeah, but I think it can come through different sources. I think it's really important that customer success leadership has a really strong perspective on what is the value that we are driving for current customers and how is that changing and how is that likely to change. Sales will be getting different signals from the field of, okay, as we talk to new customers who don't know our product yet, what do they want? What problems are they facing? Similarly, marketing at a different level will be facing that. Product is hopefully constantly thinking about what is possible, where are we going, what's aligned with our vision. And yeah, I think it's kind of honestly the CEO who's bringing that together.
Yeah, I think it's an important understanding or thought process that it's basically not customer success's job necessarily to find the value. The value should be defined by leadership, and then it's the job of customer success leadership to make sure that we drive that specific, the defined value to the customer. Because sometimes customer success does feel like basically we have to wear a lot of hats, and that might be also one of the most difficult hats to wear, is to actually find what does the customer need, this new customer that I've only just talked to, and that the handover documentation is rubbish from sales, and now I have to
Yes.
find out everything new, and this is a completely
Mm,
new use case. But yeah, of course, that should be centralized or should be
absolutely.
driven by leadership.
Yeah, and every time I've run a customer success team, we've always made sure that one of my key requirements in the sales handoff is that the value state, like why are they buying and who cares about what, is documented somewhere. And sales is notoriously bad about documenting things. This is also why I'm really excited about AI and its ability to pull things out of conversations. But even if it was a conversation, right? Even if it was a like, hey, can you tell me, and I will make sure this gets into their chart, but do they, why did they make this purchasing decision, and who made it? Who was the one who really wanted it? Who was our champion? Um, and then I think customer success also has a really important seat at the table and a really important perspective in driving the value discussion internally, right? There might be that sales is selling this one value, customer success gets in there and says, hey, look, like this isn't working, right? But we found this other use case, or like, I don't know, hey, we found this nuance. Like there's this one stakeholder, they're still kind of excited, but we're also hearing this, right? So I think there's the promise and there's the potential and there's the hoped for value, there's the actual value. Um, and ideally those converge, but sometimes they diverge. And that's where customer success has a really important perspective as well.
In the talks before we started this episode, we also discussed the difficulties of building a CS team.
Mm,
And I'm interested in the first steps. So, because you also mentioned that, of course, founders have a strong vision for the company, and then they sort of have to transport this vision to someone that they are probably hiring, so someone externally. How do they
hmm
do that, and how do they choose the perfect person for that job?
Yeah. Um, I So first, you said it's probably someone they're hiring externally. Not always. I think a lot of times someone from the founding team can transition into a CS leadership role. I think that's how I got my first CS leadership job. It was part of the founding team, and we needed someone to take care of the customers. And I went from wearing all of the hats, right, and running all of go-to-market and parts of product um, to really focusing on customer success, and eventually built out that team and handed it off again. But I think it can be someone internally. To your point, though, a risk that happens is that that internal handoff happens to someone very, very junior, who doesn't have either the skills or the perspective or the autonomy really to lead. And then I think particularly I see customer success get handed off to very junior folks. Um, and often I am talking to those CEOs who are like, oh my God, I don't know what's wrong. Like, how do we make the process work? How do we make this work? How do we make that work? And that's usually the symptom when the CEO is still in those details, that they don't quite have a leader in place, and that's what they need. So I that's not a firm answer, right? But it's, I would say, look internally first, because it can be helpful to have someone who already understands the product, who already understands the use cases, who already cares deeply about the customers, and who might be able to lead. And at the same time, really make sure you're picking a leader. Otherwise, as a founder, as a CEO, you'll be in the weeds for way too long. When hiring externally, I think it's important to look for someone, for a leader who has done the early days before, right? So I have made the mistake in the past as we were scaling from a Series A to a Series B, going for our Series C, of hiring those Series C leaders when we weren't quite there yet because they were going to scale with us, right? But the folks who are used to leading at later stages and at the stages you want to go to won't necessarily know what to do if they don't have all the resources at their disposal. Won't they can be like, wait, how do I roll up my sleeves and do this? It's been so long since I've had to do the work. Like, what do you mean you don't have this all documented? It can be a really frustrating experience. But the best advice I can give is, like, organize things as well as you can, get that value statement as clear as possible, and then bring in someone who's used to that stage and who can come in and roll up their sleeves and say, all right, I'm here with you. Let's bring structure to this chaos because that's what I love doing. Give me some customers to own. Like, let's just figure this out, and then we'll see what we need to do.
I think that is a pretty good answer to my question, because I do think this is really difficult, and CS does tend to get passed on to junior people because maybe they're cheaper. I don't know exactly what the reasoning behind that is. But yeah, as you mentioned, it's really important to have someone that actually knows how the job is done, especially in the early stages. Do you have like input on how to find such a person? Is it like, or what type of characteristics and or capabilities, skills are you looking for in that type of position? Of course, you mentioned leadership. That is so, and I would define leadership more of an ownership, understanding what I need to
Good
do,
perspective.
and that I, yeah, take responsibility for what's happening. So, of course, they have to have some sort of experience, as in a couple of years of experience working in CS. But is there what else, like apart from experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ownership mentality is huge, not just the fact that they have owned things before. Um, there's this concept, one of my companies was really big on kind of these principles of leadership, where one of them was 100% responsibility. And honestly, I look for that in every team member, not just leaders, but it's particularly important in leaders. So when I'm interviewing folks, I always ask about past experience and what went right and what went wrong. And what I'm listening for isn't just what went right or what went wrong, but what responsibility are they taking? And what responsibility are they giving, right? And are they going to say, oh my gosh, well, the CEO couldn't define the direction and the product didn't do this and they didn't do that, so it didn't work, but it's not my fault, kind of thing, right? Are they going to say that, or are they going to say, like, yeah, it didn't work. I don't know. I probably could have been clearer in asking for what I wanted here and there. it was complicated, right? Like, can they acknowledge that? And similarly, are they going to take all the credit for something that was a big team event? Because you can't have egos in early stage companies. And I think this is a problem I see more in the US. I think maybe in Europe people are a little bit more balanced, but in the US you see a lot of folks being like, "Yeah, I did all of this." And you're like, "Okay, but that sounds like a big project. Like what did you actually do there?" And in this big project they wrote the documentation for it. And you're like, "Well, okay, what did you learn?" So I also look at a lot of like what did you learn from things? Can people admit when they were wrong? Can people learn? Can we iterate? Can we it's really, really, you're never going to get things right the first time at a startup, and that's fine. So, kind of bias to action, that you don't wait to have all of the information, get everything perfect. A question I love asking is, tell me about a time you've done something without all the information. Like, can you move forward? Can you act? And then can you iterate and evaluate and continue to move forward? So ownership mentality, kind of lack of ego, bias to action coupled with an ability to learn and iterate really quickly. Um, and then I always look for values and value alignment. So I hate the term like culture fit because I think that creates really sort of awful little homogeneous groups of people. But I like to look at how is this person going to come in and contribute and add to our values? Like, do they enjoy mentoring folks? Will they contribute positively to the team? Do they care about the customers? Do they care about people? I think all of that really matters. And I could go on. There's more that I look for then depending on the job. But those are some of the most critical. Um, Oh, and then an ability to deal with chaos, right? Like kind of what you and I were talking about. You look for that person who's been in the early stages, who hasn't had things clearly laid out for them, who hasn't had a ton of resources, who's had to be scrappy, who can deal with ambiguity, right? That the CEO can be like, just fix this. I don't know how to fix it, but just like fix it. And then 2 months later say, you know what? The market's shifting. We need to shift strategy entirely, and that they can just go with it and deal with it.
I like the last one. That was,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm, another thing. So you mentioned that you've hired before. Is there some like a question that you derive the most value from? Because I think hiring is sometimes really difficult, and you're trying to find that specific person that has as much of a sales mindset as a service mindset, and of course the characteristics you described. But like, how do I find that? Is there like, of course, there isn't a magic question, but is there like a couple of
Yeah.
questions that you like to ask when you're trying to find these characteristics?
It depends on the level that I'm hiring for. Um, you know, Going back to our whole value discussion, I love asking, tell me about the value you were driving for customers. Tell me about a time you drove that value. Tell me about a time you didn't. And just see if they can articulate it and if we can dive in and have a real discussion about things that worked, things that didn't. For junior hires, I love asking, well, I'll talk a little bit about work they've done, and it doesn't have to be customer success work. It could be services work, it could be babysitting, it could be volunteering at a library. And I'll say, hey, I bet that like this customer was really frustrating, or this thing, like you must have had some frustrating folks. Tell me about it. And I, if they answer and start just really complaining about somebody, that goes back to that kind of ownership and leadership mentality and empathy, right? I left out empathy, which is a key trait. But the good answers, and usually often I get really good answers, right? I'm not trying to trap anyone. I hate like one question or one thing and that automatically disqualifies you because I'm not trying to trick anybody. I want to get a full picture. I want to understand what makes you tick, what makes you work, what are you good at, what aren't you good at, because everyone's good at something, everyone's bad at something. And what I want is a team that works well. Um, so what I like about that question of tell me about someone who really frustrated you, or tell me, this client must have been really frustrating, tell me about that, um, is that it shows me, can they be like, yeah, I had this frustrating experience, but they very quickly can see it from the other person's perspective. They are able, usually I'll say like, all right, cool, what did you do about it? Are they going to blame someone? Are they going to blame management? Are they going to say, I don't know, I just handed it off? Or are they going to have that ownership mentality of seeing it through to the end? Are they going to learn, right? So I'll be like, wow, that was a tough experience. What did you learn from it? Did you do anything differently? Some people will have reflected on it and changed something or tried to. Some people won't. So in digging into like one kind of big, meaty experience, you can really tell a lot about how somebody approaches challenges and people.
The question that you asked the senior leadership, I find really difficult. I mean,
Yeah,
how does one drive value? And I
yeah.
think, how would you recommend answering this? I mean, of course, this is really difficult to now basically asking you the two sides of the medallion here, right?
Yeah.
Um,
How do you answer that?
what is the correct answer? Of course, it shouldn't be a cheat sheet for people who want to change jobs, but
Yeah.
like, what is the answer that you are looking for? Is it I, so my first thought was I probably have to first define what I mean by value, and
Mm-hmm.
then I can actually start the conversation or answer the question, because otherwise, um, it would be difficult. But would
Mm.
be your approach, or what is something you are looking for this?
Yeah, well, I mean, for a senior leader, um, they will have held this position before, right? And I might not ask as vaguely as like, what is value? But I'll say, hey, okay, at Acme Software, at your last company, um, I might say, why did people buy the tool? What were they looking for? What were you driving, right? And so what I'm looking for, a leader should be able to articulate who the stakeholder is and what the value is that they were getting out of it. And it is definitely on me as an interviewer to, by that point in the interview, have understand enough about their context that I can ask, a less vague question about that. Um, and to your point, like absolutely always ask clarifying questions. Um, Again, I personally am looking for a conversation. I don't need like a super polished answer. I'm looking for, can that person engage with me in talking about, have they thought at all about how what they're doing impacts business outcomes? And it might be that, to our earlier discussion, right? Things were messy and the whole company never aligned to that. And that's fine. But then I'm looking for that kind of discussion too, right? So maybe it's really clear. Maybe there's a really clear value statement, and you can say, yeah, we were working with heads of marketing, and the value we were trying to drive for them was transparency into lead source so that they could make better marketing decisions. And, with some folks, we were able to get that. In some cases, we weren't. We kind of really needed these extra product features, right? But can they own a clear perspective on what the customer needed and what was working and what wasn't to get them there? And it might be murky. And if it's murky, that's fine too. And they can say, you know what? Honestly, that was one of the struggles we had at the company, was that we had about 5 different use cases, and each of them we were getting towards value, but we weren't quite there. And that's fine. Um, you just need to be able to articulate that and have thought about it a little bit.
Yeah, I just thought about it. It's basically you're testing out their experience. Like, is the story that you are portraying on your CV actually the thing that you've lived through? And if you can
Yeah,
give me a story,
yeah.
tell me a good story, and then I know if you're a suitable person for that position.
Yeah, and again, it's not to double check them. It's not to see if they lied on their CV, but it's to see, okay, at what level were they operating? Because probably if I'm a leader who is customer centered and knows that we're going to have to be value focused and continuing to evaluate value, um, we I would want a partner in that, right? Or the companies I help hire, they will need a partner in that. Um, can this person do that? And if not, that's fine, right? There's other companies, I'm sure, where maybe that's a better fit. They just need to be told what to do and kind of go and do it. I don't know. But generally, from a senior leader, especially uh, in this market and at this stage, I'd look for someone who is able to articulate that the heart of what they're driving.
Yeah, in terms of lying, sometimes one doesn't lie on purpose, right? Because
Mm,
sometimes,
yeah.
for instance, I do have the head of position right now,
Hmm.
but I'm technically doing the job of a normal rep. So of
Yeah.
course your questions are then trying to figure out, did I actually do the leadership tasks that would usually come with a head of position? So yeah, so it's yeah, but
Yeah.
as you said, we need to have a conversation, and if one can have this conversation, then they might be a suitable fit.
Exactly. Yeah, have you done it, or can you stretch into thinking about it too? I'm a big fan of taking folks who haven't quite officially held that role, but who I see, especially if I or the company has a bit of bandwidth to mentor, like, can they stretch into it? Can they think about it? If we challenge their thinking, where do we go?
Yeah, I think this is also something that I've discussed with Stephen on my last podcast.
Mm,
Is that
hmm.
it's and with Sally to some degree. Was it with Sally or with Stephen? Too many discussions about this. So it's really interesting how different departments have an impact on CS and on the customer value. To basically come
Right.
back full circle,
Hmm.
if your hiring process is not really well and you are hiring the wrong person and that
Mm,
person isn't driving the value, then you probably have churn on your hands, which is really difficult to get rid of, because that is basically the reason for having the churn is you hired the wrong person, and that is something that's really difficult to get rid of.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and to build on that a bit, though, I think the other side of the coin, I see companies that don't have great value, don't have great product market fit, are struggling, and they try to hire a really experienced head of customer success to fix it. And so, on one hand, terrible customer success can lead to churn. But on the other hand, if the product market fit is not there, or if there are if engineering hasn't been working and the product's crashing all the time, like if other things aren't working, a really experienced head of customer success and customer success team will not turn that around either.
as that's true as well. Yeah. Yeah, as I said, there are lots of different stakeholders there. So as we've talked about this as well, customer success, like the function of customer success, can't be solemnly's the purpose of customer success. Hmm. Customer success can't be the task of only the department of customer success. It needs to be held by everyone. And I guess this brings us technically full circle, because then we would start the discussion again on what is value and how can leadership find it and define it. So I think that would be a great end to our episode. Is there something that we've missed in our chat today that you would like to also add?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of it, right? Kind of the defining of customer value, a little bit of the organizing of of teams around it. What do we need? I think maybe the one thing that's really important is also not waiting too long to have that customer success focus, right? And it doesn't have to be a whole team. But I think often founders get so pulled into sales that they forget that there are existing customers there, and making sure that there's at least equal attention paid is important from the start. But no, I think we covered it, and I appreciate you doing this in English too. I know I have the advantage here.
Yeah, but thank you very much for coming on, and this is a good training for my English skills. So much appreciated.
Fantastic. It was very natural. I don't know how you do it.
Try my best. So
Lots
thank
of
you very
practice,
much.
I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, let's stay in touch. And I'm looking forward to what comes next. Yeah, actually, when talking about this, what is something that you're currently working on? Is there something that when people enjoyed your talk or people enjoyed our talk, how can they follow you? And is there something that you're currently working on that can you
Yeah,
share
so
that?
I guess I never did a full intro of myself. I'm sorry for that. I so my After 16 years in Silicon Valley building and scaling companies, I'm based out of Zurich now. And so I just celebrated a year here a couple days ago. Um, so I've been diving into kind of the startup and scale up world of DACH, and also more broadly, kind of Europe, the UK. My focus is quite clear from our conversation, is customer value. I find that there's maybe a wider range of company stages here, a lot earlier stage. So in the US, I I have some clients in the US where I focus exclusively on customer success and kind of building those first teams, or revamping teams. In Europe, I find the focus is still on driving value, sometimes even before there's a team in place. So working with founders to do that market validation, to find that product market fit earlier, to talk to customers earlier, to lay the groundworks of really kind of value definition, product market fit. So I'm happy to work directly with founders doing that. I work with a couple of universities and VCs as well, leading workshops or leading sessions for the folks in their programs, and always just happy to connect with others who care about this topic.
Amazing. So first place to get in contact with you would be your LinkedIn, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep, my LinkedIn is a great place to start.
Amazing. Okay, so thank you very much for the exchange. There's a lot of things that, yeah, I enjoyed the conversation because there are a couple of things that you pointed out were so clear and sometimes are taken for granted, or that things are understood, as in, like, what was it? Basically, that the value is also needed for sales and CS, and there are a couple of other things that I enjoyed because it was so. Because you could make it this really, really clear point on what this actually means for CS. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let's stay in touch.
All right. Thank you so much. Lovely chatting with you. I appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Bye.